So today we'll hear from Dr. Estrella Sendra Fernandez on film, migration, exile, diaspora, and transnational cinema. Estrella is a senior teaching fellow in film and screen studies at SOAS. So thank you very much, Estrella, for leading the session today. And we also have a current student online as well to answer any questions that you have about what it's like to study at SOAS. So you'll be able to ask any of us any questions you have towards the end. But I'll hand over to Estrella now for the main part of this taster session.
Okay, welcome everyone and good morning. It's great to see that you're eagerly starting your Saturday with us to learn more about what we do at SOAS. And I want to introduce you to a model that I often teach in this BA in Creative Arts, which is Introduction to Film, Language, History and Theory, with one of my favorite classes, one of my favorite lectures in this course, which is the one on migration, exile, diaspora and transnational cinema. This is one that we teach usually in the second half of the term. So you will see that it is one in which you are expected to already know some basic foundations about film, but we walk you through that journey. It's obviously a summary of what usually that lecture looks like, because we only have 30 minutes, but I hope that's illustrative of what we do here in this BA. And I want to start already just showing you the aims of this course, which is basically to introduce you all to film language, theory, and start engaging in research and scholarship in film studies. And you will see that this is also from a very creative perspective. In this BA in Creative Arts, you will have very commonly or very usually some creative assessments. And for instance, here I will show one of them, which is the video essay, where we think about film in a critical way through the film medium. So you will offer or you will get a range of skills that are both appropriate to academic and professional situations in the film industry. And it is a course as well that is well fitted to switch students who maybe are also really interested in music. So I hope that this lecture, well, the topic of music is also very important, give you a sense of what that looks like. But what are we going to get out from this mini lecture today, or this tester session, as we have called it? I would like you just to get to know a little bit of the work of the contemporary filmmakers from a transcultural context and from a decolonizing perspective, something that is very important in SOAS whenever we approach the topic or the term the global. We don't just think of Eurocentric examples, we try to bring examples from all over the world. But also I would like to get to introduce you to some key film theories that we will study in this course, and very notably the ones that are quite related to each other, which are the ideas of accented cinema and intercultural cinema. Why this? Because we want to make sure that you understand that film is not just about the image, it's not just about the visuals, but it's rather a multisensory art. So when we introduce you to the language of film, because again, this course is called Introduction to Film, we don't want just to think that film is about a visual medium. It's rather an audiovisual medium that can invoke other kinds of senses. And this topic of intercultural cinema and migration as represented in cinema is very illustrative of that language, which is audiovisual. I'll start with some basic explanations of terminology, and more specifically, I'll introduce you to key terms such as exile, migration and displacement. How can we understand this? In what ways they are different? Then we will move to theories, to this idea of intercultural cinema and accented cinema and their different languages or aesthetics. And then we will see how this reflects into case studies, Alain Gomis, and if we have also time, I prepared a second case study, Ura Benjamina, just to bring the work of a man and a woman, but we may not get enough time for the second one. We will see. I was hoping the second one will lead to the discussion. But let's get started then with terminology. I want to take you again to this journey. It's very pertinent to think of this learning process as a journey when we are thinking of film and migration. So let's look at exile. Exile and alienation are two terms that refer to the act of separation from the home place, from the place of origins. And what is really interesting about this idea of exile is that it is bidimensional. It has two dimensions. So one is external, and it refers to the bodily act of living, and the other one is internal, is psychological. It refers more to the psychological implications of exiling, of living and moving somewhere else, and not precisely because of chosen reasons. So when is alienation an interesting term? Well, when we are precisely emphasizing that idea of the psychological effect caused by exile. And what is really interesting is that this doesn't really end when you finish your journey. It is one that can be felt abroad and at home. So sometimes sometimes we may also feel that we are strangers to ourselves for multiple reasons in a particular place. And that's when we want to leave. But when we leave, it doesn't mean that we are no longer going to feel that sense of being strangers to ourselves. And this is something that is theorized by Kristeva in a book that was published in the 19th, which is also the period in which this idea of intercultural cinema emerges with key theories that I really want to introduce you to in a second. But before, I also want to clarify what we mean by migration, displacement. Sometimes we use all these terms in an interchangeable way. And I've put here some images that you may recognize from some films, The Miserables, and yes, let's see if you recognize them and bring this up later in the discussion. So when we use these terms, as I was saying, sometimes we use them interchangeably, but they are not all the same. So we were just looking at exile and alienation, emphasizing that idea of the psychological effect of exile. Now let's look at the difference between migration and displacement. Migration is often theorized as a past fixed event that is easy to locate, that makes someone identifiable by others as a migrant. However, displacement is, in the same way as alienation, a continuous state of being. It remains an ongoing condition and feeling which is concerned with the separation from home. And sometimes this often feels that you feel that you are responsible for returning, but then there is also that distance between the home that you left and the one that it has become today. So this is all very interestingly theorized by Laura Marx in one of my favorite books of film theory, really, which is The Skin of the Film. And this is where she introduces to this idea of intercultural cinema as a movement in the sense that it is the expression of a group of people who share the political issues of displacement and hybridity. But this doesn't mean that the films all look the same, because the individual circumstances are very, very differently. But what is interesting is that this is a kind of cinema that emerged in between 1985 and 1995. So look at it, quite at the same time that this idea of being strangers to ourselves also emerged. And what happens is that it is also the context of the rise of multiculturalism. So this is the kind of film that emerges by artists who are from cultural minorities who lived in Western metropolitan centers. And they are often recent immigrants from Asia, the Caribbean, the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa, as well as First Nation makers. And what is really interesting about this kind of cinema is that it also involves another way of working with the industry. So often this kind of intercultural cinema is one that is independent. So the kind of independent films that we will refer to today. So that's what we mean by working through different alternative production, distribution, and exhibition ways, because they tend to be suspicious of mass circulation and the privileges over there. We need to think as well of the kind of films that get marginalized from the mainstream circuits. And what are the aesthetics of this intercultural cinema? What does it look like? Well, you will see that it is a kind of cinema that is characterized by the different cultural codes and ways of representing the idea of memory and experience. It is experimental, it is fragmented. It appeals to non-visual language, that is embodied language that appeals to our bodies and the experiences of the senses, such as touch, smell, and taste. And what is really interesting is this idea that is called haptic visuality, which refers to the capacity of the vision to evoke the tactile sense. Okay, let me put you an example. This is, for example, when we watch a film and we cry because we are so emotionally touched that we need to express or respond to the film through our bodies. So this is precisely what Laura Marks refers to. Haptic images invite the viewers to respond to the image in an intimate, embodied way. And this is also a period in which another theory, so think about the first one, this book we were putting here in the reference, Marks 2000. Just 1 year later, this other book appears by Hamid Nafisi, who is himself an accented filmmaker and writer. So what does accented cinema refer to? It is when cinema has an accent, but the accent doesn't really refer to, for example, my accent. I'm Spanish and I speak English in an accented way. It refers rather to a more profound dimension of accent. And it's this idea of having an experience of displacement, the filmmaker himself or themselves, but that gets reflected in the films. So what do these filmmakers have in common? This idea of a liminal position or location in society and the film industry. When we are marginalized in society, we often have as well difficulties accessing the main film industry. So we need to find alternative ways. Again, another idea that refers to this idea of intercultural cinema. But accented cinema refers more specifically to this situation of marginalization in the film. It's more of a previous kind of experience. And let me explain this clearly to you. There are different kinds of accented cinema, and you will read about them extensively in this book, but just to mention the three main kinds: exilic, diasporic, and ethnic. And here what is relevant is to understand this concept through the idea of double consciousness. And it's when we feel that we are not just marginalized because of how others look at us, but it's also that we marginalize ourselves because we are continuously trying to get recognized by people. So that's why Dubois refers to us as this idea of double consciousness, and it results from a deterritorialization. So these accented films are the ones in which we often feature borders, journeys, ideas of belonging and at home, and so on. So again, the aesthetic exile style of accented films is going to be very fragmented, very multilingual. So the stories of the characters tend to be shaped by the experience of migration, by the experience of displacement. And these are maybe biographic films. They are very much informed by the experiences of the filmmakers themselves. Again, it's also a kind of language that is epistolary. What does this refer to? When we write letters to each other. I mean, now it would be more like shots of WhatsApp messages, video calls with people back home, and so on. But what we get here is these characters who are nostalgic, who are feeling lost, who are traveling, who are dealing with identities issues that are triggered precisely by the idea of displacement. And Nafisi argues that the best of these films signify upon exile by commenting upon and critiquing the home and host societies and cultures. We often have dilemmas. It's not about idealizing home. We have characters who think very differently about whether we need to return home or not, the idealizations of home, and so on. So very complex situations that eventually everyone is going to face if they are part of this migration movement. But Laura Marks was also saying that at some point, maybe this category of intercultural cinema wasn't really necessary. And I was saying at the beginning how it emerged in the 90s, I mean, from 1985 to 1995. So she was saying maybe at some point we will just talk about transnational cinema. And actually many of the films today are the result of co-productions. So I want to also just briefly mention this idea of rooted cosmopolitanism that is theorized by Kwame Appiah. And it's one in which we don't want to think anymore about people as migrants, but rather people who are both have cosmopolitan experiences of traveling across borders, but also feel very rooted at the same time in their places of origins. And this is precisely a term that he applies to people from Africa who intensively engage with many narrow overlapping communities at the same time. Cosmopolitanism is also an idea where we all feel that the world is a shared hometown. So this is what I want to illustrate through the case study of Alain Gomis, whose films deal with the human existence, depicting individuals who navigate various cultural contexts, but yet they are always grounded in Senegal. So I've put here his films and also a few pictures of how I got to know him. So when I studied my master's at SOAS, I was studying African film, and my tutor back then was the founder of the Film Africa Festival. And then I went to this Q&A where they needed a French speaker, and I was translating what the character was saying. I absolutely fall in love with his films. It started to win so many awards. So it's kind of like a very coincidental focus, let's say, that results from a period in which I was studying film. I started to work for film festivals where I've been doing a lot of research and work in the past 10 years now. And then again, it was a period in which this filmmaker was started to be internationally acclaimed and recognized. And I thought it was just a perfect example of this idea of accented cinema. So I talked to him, I interviewed him, of course, and everything. And what it was really interesting was that he was the perfect example of being an accented filmmaker. And I have selected here a quote which says, "When we live outside of our country, we live with an image of a souvenir that eventually becomes a little fixed over time. What is difficult is when you leave the everyday. Your country keeps evolving, but you remained in a period a bit past." And I want now to share with you a video essay that I've made about his work, where I illustrate as well this idea that he wanted to portray in his film. And I quote again another section of my interview with him. "For me, it was important to show in this film the relation between a dream country and those little things that will make it impossible to return. I mean, you can return physically, but the country that you left does no longer exist by force. It has evolved." These are a few shots, but now I want to get to that creativity aspect of our BA and show you a video essay, which is one of the ways in which students can engage with our course. Instead of doing class presentations, there's also the option of making video essays. Let's have a look at this one.
They put it through 50 francs. Chapeau.
Ça, c'est shérif. Quand on vit à l'extérieur de son pays, on vit avec une image et des souvenirs qui finalement sont un peu figés dans le temps. Et la difficulté, c'est d'avoir, quand tu quittes le quotidien, il y a quelque chose où ton pays continue à évoluer, mais toi tu restes à une époque qui elle est un peu passée. Et donc il y a une espèce de séparation qui se fait comme ça.
T'es nouveau? T'es nouveau?
Ouais.
Double ration. Bah, pour rembourser la dette.
La dette?
Bah, totalement. Mon grand-père était tireur sénégalais. Mort en verre d'eau pour la patrie. Hein?
Ah bah alors double ration.
Un peu, ouais. Qu'en a-vous?
Frère, les nuits elles sont froides. Et les rations elles sont minces.
na yango no yoka ngai nyonso ekokende malamu nzambe akosunga nsima ya mokolo soki opota ekauki tokotia ye protese akobanda kotambolaka na yango na bondimi nsima ya opération soki opota ekauki nsima ya sanza motoba tokotia ye protese ya lokolo oyo ekotinda ye atambola.
Sur la situation enfant. Travaille pendant 2 ans, économise avant de partir en vacances, mange bien, dorme bien, se repose en partant, font édition pendant 1 mois, puis commence à mentir, la France, l'Eldorado, le paradis, reviennent, recommence 1 an, 2 ans, 1 an, 2 ans. Combien de gens marchent sur la situation enfant?
Right, so I hope that the streaming was okay so that you could see that. But again, like this is one of the works that you could submit. And as you've seen, is one in which we engage with film, building on theory or applying certain theory, in this case, accented cinema and intercultural cinema. We try to bring clips from the film where we can see that aesthetic of a style of these film movements, this idea of being fragmented, of calling to the body and so on. And the last year, we made an introductory guide to video essays just to help the students in this journey of making a video essay for the very first time. Again, one option. Another option is to just submit the typical class presentation. But I have to say the quality of the submissions was so good that we decided to put together a competition, an award where students could actually submit their films. And this is part of the School of Arts Audiovisual Awards, where students can submit photography, podcasts of films in individual and group categories and get one of the prizes. And actually the picture in the poster is the one that won the award for the photography category last year. Right, we don't really have much time for the second case study, but what I would like to do really is to just show you the trailer of the film The Beans, which is available on Netflix. I'm not sure if you've seen it already, but it's just to show another example of an accented film made by a filmmaker with Moroccan heritage, but who has been raised and based in France. And you will see that her own life experience is also the one that will inform to some extent what is happening in the film narrative, in the story. And actually the main character of the film, Ulaya Ambrara, is her sister, and she's the one who embodies this experience that she wants to tell us. Let's have a look at the trailer, and then we can ask some questions about the way in which we can understand this film as an accented cinema. I would like to hear that from you. So pay attention to the trailer, and then you can ask any questions you may have. It's a very short trailer.
Une canette plus une barre chocolatée plus une sucette à 2 € seulement. Qui veut des briquets? C'est une marque du futur. Même en Chine, ils ont pas sorti ça. Ah ouais? Cricket. Je vous donne la petite brochure contre le racisme. Le sourire. Non mais c'est bon, ça va, on a compris, ça fait 10 fois qu'on le fait.
Ah oui, qu'est-ce que tu veux faire, tiens, dans ta vie? J'aimerais bien savoir. Toi.
Bah comme tout le monde. Money, money, money. Money, money, money.
Moi, qu'est-ce que t'as, t'es comme ça, la madame, là? Vas-y, casse-toi, là.
Rebecca,
Tu veux quoi?
On veut bosser pour toi.
Tu te crois pas l'emploi, quoi? T'as du clitoris, j'aime bien. Tiens, tes courses. 20 €? Mais je préfère galérer au supermarché. Il faut oser être riche. Tu visualises la thune et elle viendra à toi. On n'a qu'à juste se poser, visualiser, la thune, elle vient comme tu dis. T'expliques comment t'es. Vroom. Vroom. Cadeau.
Putain, c'est l'iPhone 6 Plus.
Doniamni, je
Flos. Depuis quand tu te prends pour une daronne, toi?
attends, vous allez où comme ça là?
petite dans ses étoiles.
Je sais même pas comment tu t'appelles.
Ouais, c'est con.
Mais quand t'es Dieu, t'as des responsabilités. T'es obligé de veiller sur tes enfants, c'est comme ça, c'est écrit.
Et ben en attendant, il nous a pas reconnus.
Les mecs, c'est comme les chiens. S'ils sentent que t'as peur, ils te bouffent. Et toi, t'as souvent l'air d'avoir peur.
Non, j'ai pas peur.
Oh, putain. Tu vois que t'as peur? Bah, t'es flippante aussi, hein. J'ai beaucoup d'ennemis, j'ai beaucoup d'ennemis.
Right, so these are the questions that I had prepared for you to get the discussion started, but from here we can take any questions you may have. Who are the main characters in the films? What are the spaces represented in the film? Taking into account that this is a film that is happening in Paris, do we actually get that postcard image of Paris that often gets represented in films? And also, what are the ways in which characters interact with these spaces? How can the theories of intercultural cinema and accented cinema help us understand the film in a more critical way? Can you think of any other accented or intercultural films? And what do you know about them? Right, this is all really. Now I think it's time for questions. Have a look at the questions again in case you want to start sharing some thoughts. And I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see me a bit better and I can interact with you and answer to your questions. Thank you so much for listening. And yes, welcome to SOAS. These are a few references that we have been using. And just before we move to the debate, I want to show you the resources. So the library doesn't just have books, it has an amazing list of DVDs. And other than this, we have Canopy, where you can watch and stream many different films. And also we have a course that is called African Film Library, where we give you access to many African films that maybe are not on DVDs that you will be able to find in the library, although we do have a lot. And also just to take into account that if you've seen, there's a lot of reference here to festivals we've been attending, researching, to films we've made. And this is because we are privileged to be in the heart of London and of film culture. So many film festivals that happen here that relate to the different theories that we are studying. So it allows you as well to kind of take your knowledge to these festivals as you attend them. Thank you so much for your attention, and we look forward to having with us. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Estrella, for that really engaging session. If anybody does have any questions, now is a great time to ask. We've got about, I'd say 10 minutes left of this session for any questions. So Estrella, myself, and Laura, who's our student ambassador, we're all here to answer any questions you have. So please feel free to ask us. You can use the Q&A. You can also use the chat function, or if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand, but do remember that the session is being recorded.
And questions can be about the lecture, about the course, about anything really. Oh, there's one question here about other models that there are in the creative arts course. Would you like to answer to that from a student perspective?
I am not in the Bachelor, the Creative Arts BA, but I was having a look at the courses, and I think you touch a lot of different art forms, not only film. Mm-hmm. Although I have to say I was enjoying so much the lecture, even though I am not a film student myself, but because I think in general it gives you the sensibility, or like the sensibility to the stories that are non-Eurocentric, that maybe happen in realities that we don't have access otherwise. So I think everything has an enormous value. If you want, I can share in the chat the structure of this BA. I have it right here, the link. So all of you at home can have a look at what are the courses available.
Yeah, and I am actually putting in the chat here where you can see how the BA is structured. And I'm really glad that you could see that sensibility of the whole philosophy of the BA in creative arts, because again, as you've seen, even though we are looking at film in this particular case, music is indispensable to remind us of the idea of home. Even displaced characters, they will listen to music from the place of origin, or even the kind of sound editing in the films is telling us so much about this experience of displacement. And actually there is another model where I have talked specifically about the latest film, Félicité, which is called Great Works, Art, Film, Literature, and Music. And what we do is that we show one piece of work that we really like, and we explain why this we think is a great work. And then there's other courses, writing across arts. If you click on the link, you will have access to that. But go ahead and tell us a bit about the structure. That would be very nice. Oh, you are still muted?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, yes.
Hello. Wait a sec, because I think that there are 3 questions waiting in a panel saying questions and answers. Did you? Okay. Well, about the structure, so if everybody wants to have a look, the link is there. And yeah,
I wanted to ask Laura, what subject is it that you study at SOAS?
Okay, so I do the MA Media in Development. So for me, it's more about journalism and how we can communicate and create a communication in a language for development, international development, initiatives, humanitarianism. So I am not that familiarized with the structure of this BA, but if you just link here, what I see is that there's a lot of intersectionality between film, but then music, and there is also art and history. So I think it's a very completed program. And I would say, if I can, from my personal experience, that SOAS in general offers programs that you can make your own, because there are core models, but then you also have open options and a way where the student have a space to design what would you be more interested in, what sort of art form or a specific topic that you would like to specialize in. And I found that very interesting as a student.
Thank you, Laura.
I think that summarizes very well that spirit of the fact that you can make the course yours. I was just going through some questions here But I think that I deleted one in which you were asking, is the video essay only an option for this model? It is. So you will see that usually here, what we do is that we accompany you through the process of learning. And this means that you are not going to have an exam afterwards at the end out of the blue that takes you by surprise. Not really. For example, in this film course, what we do is that we have a first film essay that is short and where you are given some initial feedback that is very constructive. It's not just a grade. We comment on what to improve and how to improve it. So that helps you for your final essay, which is a longer piece. And other than this, the last day of the course, you do class presentations. So again, last year we already tested this this idea of video essays. I was the first one who implemented this in the BA in Creative Arts. So it went really well. It was like a festival. Students were presenting their films and then we were all talking about it. And then I sent some actual grades and feedback via the system that we use to mark. But this year we were teaching online. So this year, the video essay became an excellent format because the students were going to be sharing their screen with the presentations, and some of them just instead made a film. But of course, some of them are feeling a little bit anxious at the beginning. Oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make a film. So we just give you the option as well of doing a curated series of photographs, or of doing, for example, a podcast, or of doing a PowerPoint presentation. I mean, it's up to you what kind of presentation that is audiovisual you want to do.